Hello everyone, and welcome to chapter 30 of this Flutter course. In the previous chapters, we've been working quite a lot with our database layer, and we've also been working with the UI in order to kind of make sure that we can have a list of nodes. But as you've seen in the previous chapters, we don't have nodes, or we don't actually have the ability for the user to create these nodes. So starting from this chapter, we're going to start working on creating some sort of user interface in which the user can enter their nodes, and those nodes will be saved then with our CRUD service that we've created in one of the previous chapters. Before we carry on, let's take care of one thing. At the moment, our notes view doesn't really have like the proper title. I'm going to bring the code here on the screen so you see it as well. And I'm going to bring a CRCPY. You may have your simulator or emulator or an actual device on the screen, so that's also fine. Let's do some rearrangement here. And I'm also going to rearrange the screen here so you see the code better. At the moment, the UI and the title of our main UI is just saying main UI. So let's take care of that. And that's inside notes view Dart. Let's find where we're creating the app bar, and here we're saying main UI. So as the caption indicates, we're going to change that to your notes like this, and Command S hot reload, and then we can see your notes appear there. So that part is now done. So let's now have a look at how we're going to enable a user to create new notes in our application. You see, there are different ways of going about doing that. There are like some applications that will display something called a floating action button. A floating action button is a button that appears usually to the bottom right of the screen if you have languages which are left to right, or if you have Arabic, Persian languages like that you write from right to left, then that floating action button should appear on bottom left. So it's kind of like a button that appears just floating on the screen. And usually it's like out of the way for your main UI. However, it can get sometimes in the middle of the way. So, for instance, if you have a list of notes and these notes can, like, their titles can go to a few lines of text, and then you have a floating button that sits like at the bottom of the screen, it could just block some parts of your content. So some people don't like floating action buttons, and floating bar action buttons are usually they usually appear in Android applications. I think it's coming from material design from Google. I could be wrong about this, but usually you don't see them in iOS applications. And since we're developing our application to be user friendly for both iOS and Android users, we're not going to use floating action buttons for now. But there's, just to be clear, there's really nothing wrong with floating action buttons. So what we could do is either we could go in our menu here where we have logout and create a new item in here that says, for instance, a plus or add a new note or something like that. I'm sorry, I'll just add this also to do not disturb. So we could either add an item in here that says add note, something like that, or we could go to this bar that we have up here, our app bar, and add a new item. Just like we have this 3 vertical dots, we could add a new item in there. So now then it comes to kind of like preference and some sort of reasoning of why we should add the plus button the way we're going to add it. And my reasoning behind wanting to put the plus button like beside this these vertical 3 dots is that adding a new note is pretty much like one of the main tasks users would want to do in your application's main user interface. So they either go in here to delete their notes, update their notes, or add a new note. So there are 3 things they're going to do. Deleting notes is usually not that common. So updating notes and adding new notes should be like the main actions that your users perform in your main application UI. So it should be very instantaneous. It should just be very easy for users to do that. So if we put a plus button here beside this these 3 vertical dots, then it takes the user just one click to go to the new screen in order to create a new note. However, if you put like add notes menu in here, then they have to first do one tap to go here and then another tap in order to create to go to the next screen, and that's just like one tap extra. And that's where we're going to add a plus button beside these 3 vertical dots. So before we get started with that, let's go ahead and do some preparation for that. So we need a widget, which is going to be our new notes view. And as you can see, we're going to create a new file for it inside lib views notes, which is a new folder, I believe, which we haven't had from before. Let's go in here. We have views, as you can see, and we don't have a folder called notes. So in views, what we're going to create now is this Dart file, new notes view. So I'm just going to right click on it and say here, I'm going to say a folder called notes, which we don't have yet. And I'm going to say new notes view.dart. Okay. So that's that file already. We're not going to do anything in that file yet. And now that we have our notes folder under views, it just makes sense to move our notes view here as well, which is at the moment sitting under views. You can see the breadcrumb here says lib views notes view. It makes sense now to move this notes view, which is the list of our notes, into this notes folder as well. So I'm going to need you to just drag that file and place it inside the notes folder. Okay. All right, that's great. Excuse me. So we've done that now. Now, what you may have noticed, if I bring the list a little bit higher, now that we've done that, also let's just make sure we haven't broken any imports notes view. Oh, I see. That's really great, because you see, by dragging the notes view into the notes folder, Visual Studio Code was intelligent enough to refactor also all the imports that were referring to notes view. So your editor of choice, like if you're using Sublime or if you're using some Vim, for instance, it may not be able to automatically take care of that. So by you moving your notes view inside the notes folder, depending on how you do it, you may need to fix your imports as well. So if you search for notes view.dart, let's have a look at, I can see the only place it was imported, it was the main.dart file. So you might need to go and fix that import in there. Okay, so if you're getting an error for your imports, then you know why. All right, so that's moving our notes view. Now, if you've noticed, if you go back to the editor here, you probably have noticed that we have some red files in here, and it's because we have added our email, an email field to our auth user. So if you go in here, you can see that we added this email field in our auth user in one of the previous chapters, because we needed to be able to retrieve notes for a specific auth user from our node service. Okay. So after adding that, now we've broken our tests, and we haven't really had the time yet to fix the test. So let's have a look at how we can fix our test. If we scroll down a little bit in our tests file, you will notice where we've broken the test. And this is here. We're in two places where we're creating an auth user. Okay, here. And the way we're working with this auth user in our test is not really something that we're writing tests for later. Like, we're not actually creating an auth user and then doing a test against the auth user's email. So it's, at the moment, it's pretty much just decoration, in that we need to just make sure that our tests compile and that we don't have a compilation error here. So let's go and see if Visual Studio Code can help us with that. So I'm just going to do command dot on Mac or control dot on Windows and Linux and say add required argument eval. And for email, you could just say foo@bar.com. So that doesn't matter so much. And a comma at the end to get Dart formatter to format the file correctly for us. And then, excuse me, gonna get help from Visual Studio Code again and say add required argument email. And again, we're gonna say foo@bar.com and a comma at the end. All right. So as you can see in the caption, we also just need to make sure that we're running our tests and making sure that we haven't broken anything. So let's go to our tests in here and see if I can bring this up a little bit, change the screen layout so you see what I'm doing as well. Increase the size of the screen, and I'm going to search for Flutter test, and that's the command that you also have to type, as the caption at the bottom of the screen indicates as well. And let's just run our tests and see what we get for results. If we've done everything correctly, we shouldn't have any problems with our tests at the moment. But you may have diverged from the course for a good reason and written more tests, and you may then have to fix those tests as well. And I highly encourage all my watchers, whoever's watching this course, to actually do as many tests as possible, experiment with widget tests, integration tests, and unit tests as much as you can to learn how that works. All right, so that's that. Now let's go ahead and change the screen layout. We've taken care of our tests now, and you can see the tests have passed, and also we don't have any more red flags inside our auth test.dart file. All right, so what we need to do now, you see, when we then add a plus button to our main UI in order to go to our new view, which is, I believe we created it here, new note view, we need to define a route for it. We've already done that for all our other routes. So if we have a look at our, let's see if we can find it, constants routes, we have verifiable email routes, we have notes route, register route, and all of those. So I'm just gonna have a look at my notes and make sure that we define our new route in here. Excuse me. So let's go and call this new route, and we're gonna call it new note route, and we're just gonna say slash and notes slash new note. All right, so, and remember, this doesn't really mean anything except for, excuse me again, except for you to handle like your route name. So if you had like notes with a Z, it would also work as long as you're using the same route name everywhere. So don't think that this is like bound to any sort of a magical file finding mechanism in Flutter. It has nothing to do with that. It's just for you to define your route name. So you could literally just say foo in here. And as long as you use this route name everywhere, everything's just going to work as expected. So that's our new note route created inside the consts of routes Dart. As the notes indicate, as the caption of the screen indicates, we have to go to main Dart file in here. And we need to then go and define that route here. Okay, so we have login route, register route, notes route, verify email route, and then we have to define this new route, which is called new node route. Okay. So let's just say new node route. It takes a build context in here. We could just ignore that with an underscore if you want to. I'm not doing that. And then we're going to create a new instance of new node route. Sorry, a new node view. But we don't have that yet. So let's go and define the new node view. But for now, I'm just going to say const new node view like this. And this is not going to work because we don't have that view set up yet. We've just created the file for it. Okay. So I'm going to close some files, which we don't need. And let's go into our new node view. And as the caption indicates, we're going to create a stateful widget called new node view. So I'm going to use Flutter's, Visual Studio Code's stateful widget template here, STF. And I'm going to call it new nodes view, right? And we're going to get some errors, and you know already that's because we haven't imported material.dart. So I'm going to get help from Visual Studio Code, command dot on Mac or control dot on Linux and Windows, and say import material. And all those errors are going to go away. Okay. So now we have our new node view. Excuse me. So let's then inside this new node view go create a simple scaffold. So I'm going to say we have a scaffold, and inside our scaffold we have an app bar, and we're going to say app bar, and an app bar has a title, and in here we're just going to say const text new node, something like this. And for the body of this scaffold, we're just going to add a const of text that says write your new node here, something like this. Okay. So this is a very simple stateful widget at the moment. I mean, it's not even stateful. What it's doing right now is it could pretty much be achieved with a stateless widget, but in the next chapters, we're going to add more and more logic to this view. So it needs to be a stateful widget for it to be able to work in the future as well, for what we have planned for it. Okay. Excuse me. So now that we have this new node view, let's go ahead in here back to our main Dart and get help from Visual Studio Code to import that file for us. So I'm just going to say import, and you'll see it will be a new import right here on line 5 for me, maybe another line for you. So it's import a new note view, and it allows us to basically define a route. I'm just going to say Command S, and just to be sure, since actually not to be sure, we are 100% certain that the changes in our main function won't be taken into consideration when we do hot reload. We have to do hot restart for these changes to take effect. So let's do a hot restart here. Okay, and for some reason, I can actually see my strcpy has now crashed again. It's a bit flaky. That's okay. I'm not going to complain. It's just an open source project, to be honest with you. And I can see I actually have lost my connection from Flutter as well to the program. So let me run that code now in strcpy on my actual Android phone. And I'm also going to ensure that my Android phone actually has Wi-Fi as well. So I'll turn Wi-Fi on my phone, and I'm going to go back here to the main interface. So while this is all compiling, let's go to the next step that we have to take care of, which is actually displaying. Which is actually displaying this new note view. All right. As the caption indicates, we need to go to the notes view, and on press of the icon button, show the new notes view. So I'm going to go to my notes as well, go to notes view. And we have to add a little button on our notes view. So let's go ahead and go there, have a look at how our notes view is structured at the moment. As you can see right now, we have an array of actions, which just for now, it has a pop-up menu button. Excuse me. And we need to add a new icon button in there. So let's go ahead and say icon button. An icon button has to have an icon and an unpressed. So let's say unpressed. So remember, this is going to be our plus icon, all right? So that's our unpressed. And for the icon, we're just going to say const icon. And then we're going to say icons add. And as you can see, I believe Visual Studio Code was able to show your icons right in line as well. So you can see here, that's how the button is going to look like with just a plus button. All right. And a comma here to get that working. So if I do Command S in here, now we should see a plus button after hot reload. All right. So, but that button isn't doing anything because it's unpressed, it's empty. All right. So what we need to do is just to say navigator of our context, our build context, and we're just going to push a route called new node routes. That's it. All right. So that's all you have to add a comma here just to get the code formatting working. All right. So let's actually test this and see if it works. So I'm going to press the plus button in here, and you can see our new node route is being displayed on the screen with the little text that we added here that says write your new node here, right? And pressing the back button will then send us back to the main UI of the application. And you may have noticed that in the notes view, I didn't say push name and remove until. And that's because when you press the plus button in order to create a new note, you want the user to be able to get back to the main UI of the application whenever they need to. And that's what is facilitating this back button right here, okay? All right, that was great stuff. And that is pretty much all we had to do for this chapter. So a short chapter is kind of refreshing, to be honest with you, if you ask me. So that's really good. As is tradition, let's commit our work so that we can get ready for the next chapter. I'm going to change the screen layout here a little bit. Oops. Let's go in here, change the screen layout. And let me bring up the terminal and increase the size of the screen so you see it better. So we're going to have a look at our Git status, and I can see there's a whole new folder in here called libviews notes, and we have two files under there, which is our notes view and new notes view. So let's just say git add all and have a look at our status. So you can see now everything's mentioned there. I'm going to get rid of this, make it a little bit bigger so you see better. So what we need to do is just to commit this first, and we're going to say step 13. I believe so, at least. So let's have a look at our logs. Yeah, step 12 was the last chapter. So we're going to say step 13. And I'm going to push now our commits to GitHub. And then we're going to say git tag step 13 as well, and git push tags. All right, so that's for our tagging as well. So if I say git tag, now we can see all the tags that we've created so far, 13 of them. All right, so that's pretty much what we had to do. And now, as again is a tradition for every chapter of this Flutter course, I usually talk about what we need to do in the next chapter so we can get ready for that chapter as well. In the next chapter, now that we have our new node view, we are going to work with adding the logic to new nodes view so that we can actually insert new nodes into our database so that we can start manipulating those nodes. So next chapter is going to be a bit of a heavy chapter code-wise. There is a lot of code. So if you want to grab some refreshments, be my guest, please go ahead and do that. And I'll see you in the next chapter.